Welcome to topic 1 of network security concepts. In topic 1 of network security concepts, we have two subtopics, and those are the functions of security and operational security, sometimes called OPSEC. Okay, so let's have a look at the functions of security then. So the functions of security can be thought of, according to this course, as prevention, protection, and security. So they say that network security is the practice of preventing and protecting against unauthorized intrusion into corporate networks. As a philosophy, it complements endpoint security. So network security is a complementary type of security, and it complements device security. Endpoint security focuses on individual devices, and network security focuses on how these devices interact. And hopefully from some of your other studies, you'll know that a network is two or more devices connected together for the purpose of sharing resources and information. So network security requires both prevention and protection of networks. So some concepts we need to be aware of in functional network security are illicit access. So one of the primary functions of network security is to prevent illicit access, and illicit access can lead to modification of network resources. What does illicit mean? We can think of illicit as unwanted with a kind of a slight hint of maliciousness to it. So unwanted access by an intruder that may actually come in and modify some data in there. So what will be the consequences of illicit access and potential data modification? Well, not just data modification, we have some other consequences of illicit access, and they include identity theft, viruses, malware. And what we need to consider is, if we have a hacker, someone with malicious intent, their primary goal is escalation of privilege. So if you think about privilege as being a circle of control, the lowest level of privilege would be no access to the network at all. Then you might have guest level access. Then you might have user level access for staff. Then you might have some kind of administrator level access or management level access. Then you might have some kind of super admin, power user access. So each of those is a level of privilege, and with that level of privilege comes the ability to make bigger and bigger changes to the environment. So the primary goal of a network intruder is to try and step up that ladder of privilege and escalate their level. So looking at some of these topics in more detail, first one is data modification. So data modification is sometimes called a data manipulation attack. And this is where an adversary, and someone that we don't want, they don't take data, they don't remove data. What they do is they make subtle changes to data for some type of gain. Okay. Now, the ability of attackers to manipulate and shift data around can cause great difficulties and big problems for an organization. So let's say if an attacker was to get in to a company system or a database and manipulate some data about some stock or something, and this caused the company to go and sell the stock or buy the stock, this could potentially create a domino effect towards a very expensive problem further down the line. So data manipulation attacks don't always result in a direct financial gain to the attacker, But if an attacker's managed to carry out an attack, then this could result in a loss somewhere else in the business. So an example we have here is an attacker carrying out an attack against health records, health record information for patients in hospitals, and altered critical data like drug doses and prescriptions that need to be administered. That could result in something quite bad. So there's an example of something that's not necessarily financial gain, but if you were to be able to hack into like a hospital's IT system, you could cause all sorts of problems. Okay, so that would certainly be an example of a non-financial attack. But in terms of data manipulation, that could be quite a critical situation. So looking at one of the other consequences of illicit access identity theft, if illicit access results in removing data from the organization, taking a copy of data, this can be called data exfiltration. Okay, data exfiltration is filtering something out of an organization or a personal network. Now, identity theft can be one of the consequences of illicit access and data exfiltration. Okay, now there are kind of 5 broad categories of identity theft that we should be aware of. The first one, criminal identity theft. So posing as another person when apprehended for a crime. So you've committed a crime, you pretend that you're someone else in order to try and get away with it and pass the blame onto them. Okay? Financial identity theft is using someone's bank details without their permission at the simplest level. Identity cloning is copying someone's identity to assume their person. Okay, now there is a kind of something to think about, and not entirely sure how directly related this would be to cybersecurity, but there is a concept that there's that you as a person, so you know your first name might be Bob or Alice or Michael. So Michael, the person, okay, is different from Mr. Michael, the identity. Okay, so something that you might want to think about is if you have a birthday card from a family member sent to you, often they wouldn't write out your full title with Mr., you know, or Miss, or Ms., or Mrs., whatever title you have, Captain, Doctor. But when you receive a legal document, you'll notice they always use the full title, and that is actually your legal identity. So by no means a legal expert, but when they clone an identity, what they're cloning is the legal representation of you. Okay, so then we have medical identity theft. So this is not such a big issue in European countries, because in countries in Europe in general, we have state-provided healthcare. Okay, so healthcare is usually free, or in most countries in Europe, it's at a very small cost in comparison to in the United States of America, it has the most expensive healthcare in the world. So in that instance, people might often try and use someone else's social security number, or that they can do some kind of insurance fraud, because medicine is run as a business in America. So not so much an issue in the United Kingdom or some of the countries nearby. Certainly, I know that in France and Spain, they both have publicly provided healthcare. So it's unlikely you're going to be in a situation where you don't have the money or the insurance to do this. But if we were in a case where medicine became a big business, then it might be the case that medical identity theft would become a factor. Now, the last one, a bit more interesting, child identity theft. So this is similar to some of the other ones. And it's basically when someone uses a child's identity for personal gain. Okay, so in America, we see this. Children's social security numbers are valued because they don't have any information associated with them. I don't know if that's such a case in the UK. An example I can think of that might be a bit closer to home was, I remember in the early 1990s, there was a bit of an issue in the UK with the interest rate. So most of you folks will probably only know of very low interest rates. Like the interest rate has been 0.5% for the last 10, 12 years, since 2008. But before that, the interest rate used to hover at about 6%. I remember it was 5.75 for a while. They used to put it up by 0.25% down. But in the early 1990s, the John Major's Conservative government tried an experiment with the currency, and they linked it to the German Deutschmark. And this created, it was a thing called the European exchange rate mechanism. It predated the euro, and it caused some really big problems in the country. It created a situation called Black Wednesday, when the pound was devalued. And at that point, the government put the interest rates up well above 10%, 13, 14% interest rates. Now, this was really good if you had savings, but the bad thing was everyone who had a mortgage, their mortgage shot up in price by 10%, and that wasn't 10% of the monthly repayment, that was 10% of the whole loan, So if you had for ease of calculations, if you had a £100,000 mortgage, and you were taking that over 25 years, that would be £4,000 a year. Okay, and if the interest rate was 1%, that would mean you would pay £1,000 interest a year. Okay, so you've got your £4,000 repayment plus your £1,000 interest. So that would be £5,000 you'd be repaying every year to pay this mortgage back. Okay, now that sounds great on 1% interest. Sounds quite manageable, and you divide your 5,000 by 12, and that would give you your monthly repayment. However, imagine a government came in and hiked the interest rate to 15%. Suddenly, you would have your £4,000 repayment to pay, plus £15,000 interest. So when you divide that over a month, the repayment would go up quite considerably every month, put a lot of people into poverty, cause a lot of problems. So why am I telling you this? Why am I off on a tangent about the early 90s European exchange rate mechanism? Right, I had a relative who wasn't very well in the very early 90s, in like 1992 or 1993, just when I was really young, and my mum had to take over kind of management of our house, and they had to sell it. They sold it, and there wasn't very much money. I think there was something like, £10,000. Now, okay, that's a lot of money, if you're going to spend it on kind of going out to the pub, but if that's someone's life savings, and they've sold all their assets. Now, what they didn't want was to pay tax on that money sitting in the bank. There would be tax on the interest. So my mum put it into my bank account. I was only maybe very young at the time. I didn't really know what was going on, but they put it into my bank account. So I would say that is a very small roundabout method of child identity theft. That's the only real example I can think of. And they were doing that to avoid paying tax on some savings, I think. That's what they're doing. So maybe someone can come up with a better example of child identity theft. I know that it can certainly be useful to assume the identity of someone that's under 16. I mean, a classic one would be if you were like 18 or 19, but you were quite small. You'd try and get onto the bus and pay for a child's fare. I suppose that's child identity theft in a roundabout way. Okay, so one of the other consequences of illicit access would be viruses. So a virus is just a type of computer program that, when it's executed, it can replicate itself. And when this replication succeeds, the affected areas are said to be infected with a computer virus. So one of the consequences of illicit access can be computer virus infection. Okay. Now, unlike a worm, a virus is characterized by its ability to spread from one system to the next. And most viruses share some common parts. So we have a search routine, an infection mechanism, the means by which the infection takes hold of the target computer, a trigger, something that causes the infection to happen, and a payload, the result of what happens. So the trigger is sometimes known as a logic bomb, okay? And this is the compiled version. Now, this can be activated at any time. There can be a time trigger or a behavioral trigger. And once the trigger of the virus has been set in place, it might even be just clicking on a link, double clicking on a link, then the payload, that's the body of the virus that performs the malicious purpose, that is released at the trigger point. So when we think of viruses, there can be different phases in viruses, and we have a triggering phase, which is the virus sits dormant and then it moves into the triggering phase when it's activated, and it will perform some function. The triggering phase can be caused by a variety of different system events. Okay, then after the triggering phase, there's the execution phase when the payload is released. So we think about those characteristics when we think about a virus. Now, a broader term, and often a term used interchangeably with viruses, is malware. So malware is short for malicious, okay, malicious software. Okay, anything that's mal is usually bad. So I think mal means like sick or ill in French. So mal, in this case, is short for malicious software. Ware for software, obviously. You get spyware, greyware, malware. Okay, so malware is a broader term than viruses, and a virus is a type of malware. Okay, so is a worm, so is a Trojan, so is ransomware, so is spyware. So it's any software that's designed to cause malicious intent. So often if you have security software, you might call it antivirus software, but really it can be anti-spyware software, anti-adware software, anti-Trojan software. So it's probably better to call it anti-malware software. Then that gathers in that broader topic. Okay, so anything that has malicious intent, even if it's quite small, can be called malware. Okay, and a virus is a type of malware. Now, let's have a look at the second topic today, and that is operational security. So operational security, we can think of this as having a few different characteristics. So first of all, environmental or physical security. So if we think about our digital assets, where are these kept? If we have a server with some important files on it, where do we keep this server? Okay, Do we keep the server outside? Do we keep it in the outside our front door in the street? Do we have it secured? Do we have it in a locked cupboard? How do people get to it? Is there, do they need key fobs? Do they need badges? Do they need ID cards? Do we have CCTV? Do we have security? You know, how is this actually secured? So one of the systems that can be quite difficult to secure is an environmental system. So I've got a little graphic up here. This is a pipeline here, okay? And these can run for a long distance outdoors. And so that can be quite a difficult thing. And these are sometimes called SCADA systems, okay? Supervisory control and data acquisition systems. And there can be attacks on these, malware attacks on these. There was an attack on the oil systems, the natural resource systems in one of the Middle Eastern countries. There's actually a worm that infected them, and it can cause all sorts of damage. You imagine if you had a virus inside your computer or your friend's computer, and you think this virus is causing Windows to open, pop-up windows with adverts. You think that's bad. Imagine you had a virus inside a nuclear power station that was causing Windows to open, or even worse, Windows to close. So environmental systems security is certainly something to think about, but more direct operational security, or OPSEC, is sometimes called procedural security. And this is a risk management process encouraging people to view operations from the perspective of an adversary in order to protect sensitive information. Now, the term OPSEC is originally a military term, as many terms in kind of networking and things like operating systems are. And things that fall under the OPSEC umbrella include monitoring behaviours and habits on social media sites, as well as discouraging employees from sharing login credentials. So what actually is OPSEC? Well, OPSEC is a really simple concept, actually. It's keeping the operation secure. So not revealing to the, quote, enemy what it is you're doing, okay? Keeping your operation secure. So there are actually 5 steps of OPSEC. Step 1, identify sensitive data. So this can include product research, intellectual property, financial statements. So for example, if you're doing research on a new product, and even if you're working in a company that's you know, it doesn't have to be a huge company or anything. Let's say you were developing a new website or a new sales product, and your main rival or one of your competitors got hold of that information. That would be an example of a operational security breach, okay? A violation of operational security. So the first stage in protecting your operational security or providing operational security is to identify what sensitive data is, okay? Sometimes you might have some data and you might think, well, it doesn't seem that sensitive, but actually in the hands of the wrong people, well, that could be very powerful. The next one is to identify possible threats. So for each category of sensitive information, identify what threats are present. And this can include insider threats as well. Then analyze security holes and other vulnerabilities. Appraise the level of risk associated with each vulnerability. So you should rank vulnerabilities in category in order using factors like likelihood. So how likely is something to happen? What are the chances of something bad happening? Okay. Then if something's very likely to happen, and it does, what is going to be the damage extent of that? Okay. So if you were to lose one piece of paper that was important to the company, but how bad would that be? What's going to be the impact of that? And then, if you consider how long that's going to take, how bad that'll be, you need to also consider how long it's going to take to recover from that. And then, are you going to put a system in place to prevent that from happening again in the future? And also, if that's the case, you need to get some countermeasures in place. Okay, so perhaps let's mitigate some risks, let's do some updates, let's create some policies, let's train some staff on how to prevent this. So we've got some best practice guidelines. Implementing precise change management is certainly a good first step. So change management is just when you have a record of who is changing what, when they're changing it, and what's going to be changed, okay? So a big financial company I used to work for, if you wanted to make a change to systems, you had to create a change management ticket, and then it had to be reviewed by whatever departments that this change was going to affect. So change management is just keeping a log of all changes. Then if there was a problem further down the line caused by this change, we could find out who made the change, what they changed, and it would be easier to undo. So restrict access to devices using AAA authentication, authorization, authentication, and accounting. Implement the principle of least privilege. So only give people permission to do their job. Don't give them permission to do anything outside what they need to do. Give them the least amount of privilege that they need. Okay? And implement dual control. Okay? So ensure that those who work on your network are not the same people in charge of security. So don't put someone in charge of the network, but also in charge of securing the building. That's kind of putting all your eggs in one basket there. Okay, so some other best practice examples: automate tasks. So if you can write a computer program to automate a task, this is definitely going to remove human error from this, unless you write a program that's got a mistake in it. So humans are the weakest link in any organization's operational security because they make mistakes, they overlook details, they forget things. So automation can help remove the human element from particular tasks where you think, these are likely to be error prone. If you were to try and copy some line out of some spreadsheet into 100 other spreadsheets, and you had to do this 30 times, probably you're going to make a mistake somewhere. I mean, you might not, but if you could write a computer program, if you could write a script to do that, it's probably less likely, once you've got the script working, that there'll be any errors. And then if you need to do the job again in the future, as well as this being much quicker, you're reducing the human intervention factor, okay? Disaster recovery planning is another one, and risk management. So I already spoke a little bit about that. Try and identify the risks, how likely they are to happen, and what the impact of each of those risks taking place would be. Okay, so here's a bit of an amusing thing that I found online. This is from some CNN report a few years ago, and this is someone talking to a reporter. Okay, this is actually, I think, the police in America talking to a reporter, and look, they've got the user ID and password for their computer, Ian's computer login, okay, written on the board there, and this was on television. So basically, they gave away a police login, and look, here we go. Look, here's the path on the C drive, program files, ESRI, CAMS desktop data. Okay, so they're giving away operational security. There's a huge operational security breach. Now, just imagine if Ian, this police officer, had some secure files on there that someone wanted to get a hold of. He's just given away his username and password by writing it on a whiteboard and then letting someone take a picture of it. So I've also added this, it's a poster. I think this is from the Vietnam War, this poster here. The enemy is listening. He wants to know what you know. So this is when you think of operational security, think of keeping the operation a secret. Okay. So some questions to ask: what needs to be protected? Who is the enemy? When we say enemy, we can just mean a rival company or someone outside the organization. What are my vulnerabilities? What is the threat level? And how should we combat these threats? So finally here, have a risk impact matrix. Okay, now what we have up here is the likelihood that something will happen. Okay, and along here we have the impact of that action taking place. So let's say we think of a kind of a silly one. Let's say we have our servers in a building somewhere in Scotland. What is the likelihood of that building going on fire and burning to the ground? Okay, so let's just say we have a smoke alarm and a sprinkler system. So the likelihood is very unlikely that this is going to happen. Okay, but if it did happen, what would be the impact? The impact would be very severe. So we would mark this as a moderate risk. Okay, it's unlikely to happen, but still a moderate risk. So how would we combat that? Well, we'd have to ensure that the smoke alarm was tested by an electrical testing company once a year. Same with the sprinkler system. We'd have to make sure that there were fire safety procedures in place, fire extinguishers, things like that, to try and reduce this. Now, let's think of something a little bit more likely. What are the chances of, if we have 100 staff and they all work from home, what are the chances of a member of staff, any one of them, clicking on a spam email and causing an email virus to come into the company and send around everybody? This is possible. I'd in fact say that that was likely. Okay, now, what would be the impact of this? Low, maybe moderate. Okay, moderate. So minor impact, but still likely. So this would fall about here. Now, let's think of someone in the company accidentally sending the financial records of the company to a rival. It's possible. Okay, it's possible because we're all working from home. There could just be a mistake, and the consequences of that would be high, be severe. Okay, so that would be into the red. So this is an example of a risk impact matrix, and if we were to categorize our risks by this, we would want to try to use this to understand. Now, if we have something like that that's high, very high, then there is another formula that you have risk equals threat times vulnerability times cost. So we could actually think that, you know, this would be so high that it would cost the company an awful lot. We want to put some measures in place to try and reduce the risk of this happening. Okay, so very, very, very easy ones down here in the green area over here. We should put measures in place to deal with them, and also very high ones as well. So we definitely need to consider our kind of risk position in the market and try and reduce it. And we can do that using, we can visualize that using something like this. So that is the end of topic 1. I will stop this now and see if anyone wants to ask any questions. So you're the manager of a small company. Please provide 2 methods of prevention which will provide security in your network. Let me just stop this share just now and let's just do share here again. Make sure this is working okay. All right, so let's have a look at just open up the chat. Make sure. Right, so anti-malware on each device. That seems fair enough. That will provide. Will that provide prevention? I don't know if anti-malware will be prevention. It's more like protection. Although I suppose, and staff training on OPSEC methods. That's definitely a good one for prevention. Let's see. Restrict access to network devices and automate tasks. That's quite good for prevention as well. Protection. Create an automatic password change each semester to all staff. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. And spend money in quality antivirus and firewall. Yeah, I'd say that was more applicable. The antivirus was more applicable in the protection area than the prevention. 2 methods of prevention, right? I would think, yes, we got restrict access to network devices. What about, let's just pop in here. Hardware locations. Okay, that might be a little bit better. Restrict access to network devices as well. So use, okay, protection. We've got firewalls, access control, maintenance such as software updates. That seems pretty sensible. Although I'd say maintenance was maybe a little bit more like prevention and protection, I suppose. Right. First stage of OPSEC, identify sensitive data. Last stage, countermeasures. 5 stages. Purple Dragon. This is a bit of a sort of a more abstract question. So what was Purple Dragon? Purple Dragon was a top secret OPSEC information during the Vietnam War, all right? And they gave it that code name, Purple Dragon. Don't really know that much more about it. I just know that it's an operational security. There was an example of operational security, Operation Purple Dragon. All right. I mean, they've given it a code name as well, so you don't know what it's about. If they'd said it was like Operation Attack on Tuesday morning, then that wouldn't be very good operational security, right? What is an example of a high-risk impact vulnerability? Not updated to the latest firmware? I don't know if that's high risk. I'd say that's fairly risky. It depends where you are. Something that's very high risk, okay, very, very high risk would be something like leaving the data center unlocked, okay? Just leaving the door open and going home, something like that, okay, would be a very high risk thing to do, much higher than just not updating. I mean, if you didn't update the firmware for like 10 years, that might be very silly, but I'd say routers and switches, not in the latest firmware, might be more of a sort of upper medium. When we're talking high risk, we're talking about like things bursting into flames and people's lives being ruined. Okay. Third stage of operational security, analyze vulnerabilities, is correct. And what's the most important part of operational security? To be honest, it's a bit of an open question. I don't know. I would say probably what I'm going to go for would be keeping the operation, something like that. All right, something along those lines. Okay, so that concludes the NSC questions 1. Now, what I think we should do now is we'll just have a break for about 10 minutes. Let's have a break until 20 past, and then we'll come back and we'll look at the practical for this week. And like I say, if there's any questions as we go, just fire these into the chat and we'll talk about them. Lab 1 of Network Security Concepts. We're going to open up Lab 1 Alpine, and Alpine Linux is a distribution of Linux that's focused on security. And in Lab 1, we're going to go through a basic setup of this. So in the introduction to Lab 1, there is a link to this website. And this website here is the Alpine Linux website. And here we can download a small ISO, which will allow us to set up a small Linux distribution for testing. And this is a very small distribution, very low resources, okay? It doesn't require much. I think when we download the operating system, the ISO is about 130 megabytes when we download the full operating system. So it's very small. Now, it's important that you download the correct version, okay? And in this case, we're going to download the standard version. And this here is the architecture of the computer that you're using. You want to go for the x86-64 architecture. So if you click there, you'll download the correct ISO. Once you've downloaded the ISO, you just need to open VMware Workstation and do File, New Virtual Machine, okay? And then follow the steps in the lab. So here we have step 1, start VMware and create a new virtual machine. That was what I just showed you there, with the following settings. So you need to create the virtual machine with these. So see where it says custom configuration in VMware? What we want to choose is custom configuration as opposed to typical, okay? Clicking next. Then it says Workstation 11 compatibility. So we need to change the compatibility from Workstation 16 to Workstation 11. And all we need to do is follow through these steps here to get ourselves a virtual machine set up, okay? The steps are clearly set out here. Just work your way through this. Now, there is one small part of this that you might have a few issues with towards the end, okay? And I'm just going to cover that, a little bit of that just now. So some of you may be familiar with an editor called VI, and some of you may not be familiar with this editor. So I'm just going to give you a very brief tutorial on how you would use this to create a file, okay? So the good thing about learning how to use this is it will be available for you on any Unix-like operating system that you use in the future. And here's a really absolute very quick tutorial on how to use it. So let's say we want to create, edit and open a file. We just type vi space my file, okay? And then to get into the file, we press the return key. Now that we're in the file, okay, we can't just start typing because we're in what's called normal mode. Okay, normal mode is kind of like a management mode. It allows us to do things like save documents, exit documents, enter documents. So if we want to start typing, we can press either the insert key on the keyboard to get us into insert mode, or we can press the letter I on the keyboard for insert. Now that we've pressed I, we can say, hello everyone. Okay, we can just type as normal, no problem. But then when we want to save, we need to go back to normal mode. So you press the escape key, and that takes you back to normal mode. And then to save, well, there are a few different ways to save. I'll show you the one I use. You do Shift ZZ. Okay, and now if we cat my file, you'll see that that's saved in there. Now, let's go back into my file and I'll show you the other way to save. Another way to save is to do Shift colon, and this gives us a little flashing colon cursor down here. And we can just type WQ, which stands for write to the file, and then quit. Okay, so let's say we wanted to edit a file that already exists. We just type vi my file, okay, and we can move to the line we want, press I to get into insert mode, add some text, press escape to get back to normal mode, shift CZ. Okay, those are the shortcuts. So hopefully that little short tutorial should give you enough to get you through part 3 here. But what I also hope is that if you're having some problems, you would use our chat to ask, and hopefully we can go through and try and troubleshoot these. Now, what evidence do you need to generate to show that you've completed this lab? Okay, so if we head back over to the middle page, you'll see that there's an upload link for ePortfolio evidence, upload a PDF. Okay, and you'll also see that there's a file in the course overview section called the ePortfolio template. So all you do is you download the ePortfolio template. It's a Word document, okay? This Word document can be edited. All right, so let me just download this just now, and I'll open it and show you what it looks like. It looks like this. Ignore the fact that that's not loaded. It's just because I'm using LibreOffice. It's decided this week that it doesn't like images. It's not loading any. It was working last week. I think I need to do an update or something. Anyway, you will see an image of the Edinburgh College logo there. I won't. Right. All you do is put your first name, last name, student number, email address here. This is some style guidance. And then we want to fill out Lab 1. So what is the title of Lab 1? The title, I think, is Alpine Linux, okay? The date, you want to put the actual date in there, day, month, year. Then you want to put some evidence into this area here, okay? And the evidence that you need to put into that area is on the middle. So if we go to the middle and scroll down, it will say, add the following evidence to the ePortfolio. A screenshot of the output of the IP link show command showing both network interfaces with their MAC addresses. So what I would advise you to do is do the lab first, but one of the steps in the lab is to do the IP address show command. So when you get up to this point, you'll be able to do this no problem. Okay, a screenshot of the IP address show command, evidence of a ping to the default gateway, and evidence of Alice's login being denied. So once you've completed the lab, you should be able to go back and grab some screenshots of this and update them. Now, I've actually got a guide that I'll add to here on how to take screenshots. But what we'll do is we'll leave this kind of a little bit open to interpretation this week, and then we can talk about what's happened next week, how things have gone next week. So that's Lab 1, that's week 1, that's task 1. Hopefully everyone is okay to go and get started on that. I'll stop this share just now and just see if anyone wants to ask anything. I would like you to just get in and get started with this and see what happens. You might be fine. There might be some problems. Hopefully there'll be some questions. We've got our Microsoft Teams chat, and I would like to try and troubleshoot things through there.